First, I'd like to welcome you all here for a brief look back into time. I'd like to invite everyone to think back to the year 1957. Now, I know some of you may not have been here in 1957, so to those, I invite you to use your imagination, and hopefully I will fill in some blanks. To those of you who directly experienced the events of 1957, I'd like to remind you of some of the significant happenings that made the news that year. It was a very newsworthy year, and many events that I am sure you will either recognize or remember occurred. Very early in the year, a product was introduced that's still on the market. The very first Frisbee hit the market, and 65 years later, they're still popular. Later, the Treaty of Rome was signed, and the precursor to the European Union was inaugurated as the Common Market. And of course, that is still in existence and continues to expand. On the social front, Little Rock schools, which were never going to be integrated, were integrated, even though it took federal troops to do it. In the national pastime, the Milwaukee Braves dethroned the New York Yankees in the World Series. In music, a minor perturbation, namely Elvis Presley, introduced the top 3 selling records of the year, including #1, Too Much. And even though gone, he's still listened to by millions. The #1 television show was Gunsmoke, and reruns are still available. 1957 also saw the last I Love Lucy TV show, which is still also syndicated. Now, all of those pale compared to the next 2 stories. The first, which in retrospect had far more immediate impact than the second, but involved the very first successful launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of carrying a hydrogen bomb over intercontinental distances, tested by the Soviet Union. This occurred on August 21st and barely made the front page of any newspaper in the US. The US government issued everything but an outright denial and certainly questioned its real impact and the claims of success. People took little notice that the time frame between launch and detonation was now 28 minutes, as opposed to the 8 to 12 hours of flight time necessary for a 1957 bomber to reach the US from the Soviet Union. And that news barely made page 2. And now for the real surprise story of the year. Not only made page 1, but resulted in screaming headlines not just in the US, but around the world. On October 5th, the Soviet Union used the same R-7 ICBM that was questioned by the US to launch a small 184-pound silver-coated ball that did nothing but beep. But that little beep changed everything. It changed life in the United States and in most of the world, and it certainly changed our view of our planet and the solar system. It was the first device to leave Earth under the control of humans. Science, technology, and our view of the planet would never quite be the same. The Soviets made certain that their little ball was reflective enough so that it looked like a slow-moving star in the evening sky. You could not miss it. The trajectory was such that it covered over 80% of the world's population, and to which anyone with a cheap radio could listen to the beep. American newspapers, politicians, and military leaders had to scramble to explain, and then to react, and then to develop their respective stories, which they certainly did, including the US Army, who proclaimed it could develop an anti-missile missile in 3 years. Anybody who knows anything about anti-missile technology knows that would have been technically impossible in the 1950s. It was difficult enough in the 1990s. American education and an emphasis on science and technology skyrocketed. John F. Kennedy proclaimed a missile gap and most likely won the 1960 presidential election, at least in part because people believed that. In fact, the missile gap never existed, but that didn't make headlines until well into the 1960s, which is a subject for another presentation, which I hope you will look forward to. Thank you again.